All right, welcome back everybody. Our next session is called Biometric Authentication and Payment, and our presenter today is Kadie Jepsen, who's an account manager from Fime.
Thank you all very much for attending this afternoon. I appreciate your time. Thank you. So again, my name is Kadie Jepsen and I work with Fime, and today I'll be speaking with you about biometric authentication and payment. So I'll be discussing a bit about the payment authentication ecosystem and the standards, how biometric payment is used, whether in-store or remote, and the testing process through FIDO, as well as some of the other standards in the market. So we'll have some fun today. So this is our corporate slide, just a bit of housekeeping. There we go. So Fime, if you're not familiar, we're a global company. We provide consulting and technical advisory, as well as testing and certification for vendors and financial institutions within the payment community. So we help our vendors to develop and launch their products, specifically in this case, enabling payments through biometrics. So within Fime, we have a dedicated team of biometric experts who have carefully and artfully put together this presentation for you today. So this large picture of my face is letting you know that I'm your speaker today. My name, again, is Kadie Jepsen. I'm an account manager at Fime. So I started with the company in 2015, and since that time, I've been working with vendors across different activities from banking, transit, 3DS, lab services, tools, and most recently, biometrics. As I mentioned, Fime is a global company, so we work with customers worldwide. We have 9 global laboratories. Our headquarters are based in France, indicated by the giant purple bubble. We work with over 3,000 customers, and we also have numerous distributors that kind of help us reach our customers more closely to home. So here's our agenda for today. We'll be covering 3 topics: biometric payments and what it means, compliance with the industry standards, and biometrics evaluation involvement. So where we've seen areas to improve the test process, referencing different field issues and different studies. So biometric payment, as I'm sure many of you in this room are aware at this point, just in case, biometric payment is a transaction method in which your biometric data is used to authenticate yourself in the transaction process. So it connects a user with their financial data, such as a bank or a credit card account. And this biometric data can be received through fingerprint, voice, iris, or fingerprint. So here what we're showing is the appetite in the market right now for biometric payments, referencing the new payment index published by MasterCard in 2021. So 41% of consumers plan to use biometric payment next year. And 61% of consumers are excited about the potential of biometric verification. So to break this down even further, we have 43% who are somewhat comfortable or very uncomfortable with the thought of biometric payment. We have another 25 who are kind of yes and no. We have 16% who are somewhat uncomfortable and another 16% who are very uncomfortable. But that could just be an unfamiliarity with the technology and the security behind it. So especially in some regions, we're seeing a slower adoption rate for new technology, so there's a lot of opportunity for education. Within the study, it also mentions how 71% of people expect to use cash less going forward, and 53% of consumers agree that biometric payment is secure. So I think what we've seen over the last few years is COVID significantly shifted how we as consumers choose to pay. There was an article in UN News where according to the UN trade and development experts, we saw that global e-commerce, so your online transactions, rose to 26.7 trillion fueled by COVID-19. So people started using their phones and their laptops to make online transactions because we lost the opportunity to shop in store. And now we're able to tailor more of the user experience online. And now that consumers are returning in store, they want to make their transactions without contact of cash or card. So if only half of consumers are using or considering biometric payment, there's a lot of room to grow, but we could see through these studies that people are excited about the new technologies that financial institutions and retailers want to provide. So I won't go too much in detail on these because we've kind of gone through ad nauseum the transaction process over the last few days. There's two main scenarios for biometric payment, the first of which is a card-present transaction. So in a non-biometric payment, a consumer presents their device, like a credit card, to the POS and authenticates it with either a PIN or signature, and then it follows the standard authorization process. When you introduce biometrics, the cardholder is using their identity to verify themselves. So it's acting as a strong authentication method. So we're also seeing here that biometrics can replace the payment instrument. We see this with Amazon Go stores where consumers can pay with their palm at the checkout. Or in more mature markets like China, they're using facial recognition at the checkout in store if they have a validated WeChat or Alipay account and associated bank account. So when we're implementing biometrics into payment authentication, in store or remote, there's multiple standards defined by many standardization bodies, such as FIDO or the global and domestic payment networks. So in this specific scenario, in an in-store payment, normally for a card-present transaction, the payment networks have defined the standards of this type of transaction flow. So with the introduction of biometric on card, for example, it's more of a mature technology. So MasterCard and Visa have developed their own sensor on card test program. In a card not present transaction, so when you're online, a consumer's in front of their PC or their phone, they are authenticating themselves differently. So we're seeing the main difference here is the 3DS flow that requires the additional authentication. So the message will go through the 3DS flow to authenticate the user, and then the authorization process follows a similar flow. So there's three main standardization bodies that are co-working in this type of scenario. We have the blue, our W3C. They've defined a standard web API for browsers and platforms to support a universal checkout experience and the FIDO authentication. Our green here is our 3D Secure, which is a protocol designed to be an additional security layer for online credit and debit card transactions. And of course, the FIDO indicated in yellow, where a relying party is using an API to connect to the authenticator. In this case, a USB key, a wearable, a phone, or a computer. So FIDO is more present in this flow because the authorization is key for this kind of purchase experience, because we need to make sure that the user is who they say they are. So FIDO has introduced a mechanism with a public and a private key. Each merchant and issuer that you go through has a dedicated key. In case this key is ever stolen online, it can't be used in other cases. So this key concept removes the password and provides another way to authenticate the user. And it's not necessarily for payment. When you log into Amazon or authenticate PayPal, this mechanism can be introduced. So it's a more secure structure. So we come to our next topic, which is to comply with the industry standards. So now that we know where we might want to exist in the transaction flow, we're going to have to test. So here we're kind of explaining about the value of testing for compliance, why it's necessary and why it matters. So we've broken it into four main topics. So to ensure trust and security, to recognize and prevent attacks and spoofs from imposters, and to protect the end user with a reliable solution. So it protects your brand and your product. Also, user satisfaction. So to maintain a stable and consistent performance under various usage scenarios and environments. So I'll touch on this a bit later about how we found that there's different environmental impacts that could affect the performance of the sensor. And differentiation to demonstrate the product quality. And to foster brand equity and stand out from the competition. And interoperability to ensure the solution's compatible with other modules when implemented in the final product or when supported in different implementations. Here we're showing the industry standards for a biometric solution. So we have ISO, of course, 19795, I'll touch on a bit later. NIST, FIDO, of course, which covers modalities like fingerprint, face, iris, voice, and others. The MasterCard networks, MasterCard and Visa I mentioned, who are working on a biometric sensor program, test program, and your more niche, like the Android biometrics testing and Windows Hello. So this summarizes the FIDO certification program. So depending on where you want to exist within the flow, whether it's a server, client, or authenticator, it will determine your test plan. So the authenticator here is more of a physical product. It might be a mobile or a USB key. So since there's hardware and software involved, it'll be used to authenticate the user. So we have the biometric component certification within accredited labs such as Fime. And then you'll have the additional security testing as well. So there's different levels of the security tests that Dr. Ray touched on yesterday in her presentation. So we have level 1, which is more of your simple test and might require a direct test with FIDO. And the higher security levels will require the use of an additional approved security test lab. But there's different FIDO documents that you can reference to check the security requirements. So here's Fime's testing services. We're very proud to have offer our customers different biometric evaluation opportunities through our accreditations with the different standardization bodies. So we can do a lot of tests. So we are approved as a FIDO biometric component test lab. We're also approved as an Android biometrics test lab, accredited with MasterCard for biometrics performance sensor on card. We're accredited with ISO, and Fime has also developed and tailored our own test plan. So I'll touch on this a bit later, what that means. But it allows our customers to customize their tests and to, at the very end of it, we provide them with a letter of completion. So during the biometric evaluation, there's 2 main components that are evaluated. So there's the performance measurement and the presentation attack detection, or your PAD testing. During the performance measurement, we're measuring the biometrics performance score of a product against a sample database collected from real people. So there's the initial enrollment, the failure to acquire, and the failure to enroll. And the test issues a verdict based on the FAR and FRR score, or your false acceptance rate and false rejection rate. During PAD testing, the aim is to measure the biometric security response of a product against a variety of presentation attack instruments, or your spoofs. So usually there's 3 levels defined based on the complexity of the spoof, and the test issues a verdict based on the imposter attack presentation acceptance rate. So at the end, the test will issue a verdict based on this score. So real subjects are required for the PI creation, the presentation attack instrument, and they're required to follow a specific distribution among gender and age. And in this third column here, we see the tailored testing I mentioned earlier. This can be interesting, especially if you're looking to have more results about your product. For the interoperability, we found some instances, and there's been some cases brought to Fime where there are some issues with the biometrics card used in the field with some specific readers. There is an electrical disturbance, and there was a fallback to PIN, so the biometrics did not work. Sometimes it's an issue with the reader, sometimes it's an issue with the card, so Fime has some tools to analyze this issue. Transaction time can be another interesting one. During the FIDO testing, there's no real requirement for the transaction time. If it takes 1 to 5 seconds, that's okay. Whereas the payment schemes generally prefer a faster transaction or authorization time, especially for contactless or in transit. So depending on the market where you want to launch your product, transaction time might be a good one to test. For physical durability, there's also been some cases brought to Fime, some requests, to test if there's any impact on performance if the sensor is scratched in the field. So we're doing some scratch tests to see if it impacts the performance, and we're also doing some tests with chemicals to check that as well. And then for the environmental bias as well, we're using the climate chamber to check and see if we can monitor, control, and introduce various environmental conditions to test the sensor. And so I'll get into more of the environmental analysis in the next few slides. So here's our final topic, the biometric evaluation evolvement. So as I mentioned, we understand now what the standards are, what the tests are, but we'd like to see how we can evolve the test plan, taking into different issues and challenges that different standards or customers have found in the field. So we've brought it to 2 topics, environmental bias and the synthesized database. So in the ISO 19795 standard, it discusses that there's a list of many factors that can affect the performance of a product like humidity. So FEMS biometric experts have done a concrete study with 6 different environmental conditions on FEMS climate chamber, where 3 products were evaluated, and it shows that of the 3 products tested, some of them had bad behavior in specific environmental conditions. So the reason we're doing this study is that it's important to forecast the product's behavior when it will be introduced to specific conditions, like if it'll be deployed in Singapore or other areas with high humidity, where the performance could decrease and the user would have a negative experience. So the next steps would be to simulate with AI different environmental conditions in order to reproduce the condition without having multiple runs in the climate chamber. So meaning we would use one environment in the climate chamber and then use AI to reproduce 6 or even more environmental conditions. Because during phyto testing, we're checking first where the product would be deployed and then testing based on that information. And so if the product is planned for global use, it's not necessarily possible to reproduce all the environmental conditions. So with this kind of tool, it'll help us to have an overview of worldwide situations with many different environmental conditions. So during FEMSA Study, as I mentioned, they use different impact evaluation, NFIQ, which is a NIST measurement, the area under curve, and so on. So continuing in the study, I mentioned in the previous slide that FEMA has done a study with 6 different environmental conditions where 3 products were evaluated. So we see the results shown in the 2 charts here. It shows that there's a dependence of the product's performance based on the environmental condition. So of the 3 products evaluated, some of the products tested were more resistant to humidity conditions. So with this type of testing, we can have an idea of the risk for security and the impact on the user experience when used in dry or humid condition. So the curves show that with different environments, you won't have the same curve. You have one product on the left and one on the right, and when compared, we saw that one of the metrics was very bad compared to the other. So this is something FEMA can do. So really what the issue here is that the fingerprint recognition from a matching point of view when the environmental condition changes from the initial enrollment. And finally, we get to the synthesized database. So we want to remove personal data if possible to create some synthesized database for facial or fingerprint recognition. So where we can have different fingerprints generated that are not linked to real individuals. So it would be good to have an overview of the product's performance without having a collection of 250 real people every time you want to come to the lab to have it evaluated. So currently the question is the accuracy of the test. So while FEMA's working on it today to tune it to have results similar to a real collection, we can use this potentially for debug or QA at the beginning when a customer comes to the lab. We have one vendor, for example, had to request it a run 4 or 5 times, where we brought in a group of 100 people 4 or 5 times to help the vendor each time to tune the product during debug to make it work better. So we want to suggest a synthesized database, at least for a debug phase, and then continue to a real collection for the certification. So another use case of the synthesized database is for facial recognition. So when testing different ethnicities or ancestries, we found that there were some products that were showing bias for specific ethnicities. So the performance of the product was bad. So it's difficult as a lab to bring in 20 or 50 people with specific ethnicities or ancestries. So it can be difficult to gather this. And with the synthesized database, we could reproduce many different kinds of facial images and ethnicities to check and see if there is some bias. So this is under research for the moment. And finally, we have a QR code. So if you scan this now, I'll receive all of your financial information. Just kidding. Just kidding. If you scan it, it'll bring you to FEMA's website. So you'll learn more about what FEMA can offer, our services, training academies, test tools, more about our biometrics. You can reach out directly to our biometrics team to learn more about this progress. And you also have my email here in blue, if you can read it. So if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to connect you with our biometrics team to answer any of your questions. So thank you all very much again. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kadie. Do we have any questions here for Kadie? Bill, of course we do.
So, Kadie, do you know about the ID verification and binding working group?
A bit. I apologize in advance. So I know our biometrics team wanted to be here today, but
Okay, no, but the working group itself, though. Oh, I don't know Guillaume. He must have.
yep,
Okay. Okay.
he
So,
would be. Yeah.
okay. So, but part of that is, and it goes back to the face stuff that you were talking about. Part of that, take a picture of your driver's license or other document and take a picture of your face and do the selfie match.
Yes.
So, is that? But it's something you're not actively working on or actively involved in.
I don't know. Well, I think that they did reach out to Fime for that.
Guillaume,
So
okay.
I think it is something that Joel and Guillaume are working on with Fido for now.
I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I do think Fime is one of the proof of concept labs
I
that
don't
we're
know if
working with.
that's
I think they are.
Maybe not. But yeah, I think so, that they did reach out to Fime for that.
Have you done any work with iris synthesized databases? You named multiple biometrics and then
I think the focus for Fime was on fingerprint and facial initially. It's expanding into voice. I don't know if iris is in the pipe as of now,
Okay.
but I think it definitely would be a target maybe in the future for them.
what have you tested or done at all with iris recognition up to this point?
I could probably get you the studies. If you want to send me an email or if I could get your card, I would send you the...
I'll give you a card right after
Okay,
this. Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
Got a question over here.
When you have testing done, do the companies agree to make the information public, the results? Do they have that option?
They have the option. We've asked, generally, if it's something that's a real interesting case or product, but they do have the opportunity to say no, that they don't want to make it public information. They'd rather keep it confidential. So they sort of set it up with the, well, I know. Yeah.
Have you done any type of analysis certification of any type of behavioral biometrics?
I know that they're analyzing. Our experts are. They're doing some work with keystroke, for example. I think they did release, there's a case study. I think it's available on Fime's website where they kind of go into behavioral biometrics. You said keystroke, for example. So they have that available on the Fime website. So I think so. I don't know how far they're diving into behavioral, but it is a focus.
Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you again, Kadie. Great presentation. Appreciate your time.